The sound was muffled by the kitchen wall, but I heard it, clear as the bell that used to dismiss us from school, a sound that promised freedom, but, in this case, delivered a cage. It's just a lot, Mark, Susan's voice tight and strained like a wire pulled too thin. The house is too big for him. The taxes, the upkeep. He's a financial burden, and he doesn't even see it. I was standing on their back patio, by the grill. My grill, actually. I'd brought it over in the bed of my old Ford truck because Mark's gas-powered monstrosity was, in his words, on the fritz. My old charcoal kettle had never been on the fritz. It was simple. It worked. They had told me not to man it. Dad, please just relax. We've got it. But their friend, some guy named Todd with a backwards baseball cap and an opinion on everything, was about to douse the perfectly grayed coals with a pint of lighter fluid. I couldn't watch. So I'd stepped over, adjusted the vents, and was about to explain the science of indirect heat when the words floated out of the open kitchen window. A financial burden. I froze. My hand, holding a long-handled tong, stayed hovering over the grate. The metal was warm, familiar, solid. Everything else suddenly felt flimsy, paper-thin. Then came Mark's reply. A sigh. The sound of a man put upon, a man martyred by responsibility. I know, Susie. I know. We'll talk to him after the party. We'll frame it as a good thing. Downsizing. Simplicity. He'll be closer to us if we need to, you know. A pause. I heard the clink of ice in a glass. Then Susan, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a sound more damning than a shout. And honestly, how much longer does he have? That house, that money just sitting there. It could be doing so much for us. For Ryan's college fund. A short, sharp laugh from Mark. Not a happy sound. A sound of resignation. Agreement. My son. The tongs in my hand felt impossibly heavy. I set them down on the side table. I made no sound. My movements were suddenly very deliberate, very quiet. I looked at the grill. The coals were perfect, a beautiful, even gray, ready to cook. I turned away from it. I walked across the manicured lawn, past the laughing guests I didn't know, past the table laden with salads I hadn't made. My own potato salad, the one they always begged me to bring, sat untouched at the far end. I'd seen Susan move it there, behind a 7-layer dip. My keys were on the little hook by their back door. I plucked them off. My old leather jacket was slung over a chair. I didn't put it on. I just carried it. No one saw me leave. Or, if they did, they didn't think it was important. I was just the old man, the quiet patriarch, a piece of furniture that occasionally spoke, a relic, a financial burden. The drive home was 27 minutes. I know because I timed it once, years ago, when Eleanor was still with me. She'd laughed and said, Art, you don't need to time everything, but I did. It was how my mind worked. Measurements, order, cause, and effect. The truck rattled over the familiar potholes. The setting sun glinted off the hood. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence in the cab was a thick, heavy blanket. I felt it pressing on me, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was clarifying. The words echoed, not shouted, just there, a fact they had stated between themselves, a truth they lived by, a financial burden. How much longer does he have? It wasn't the sentiment that hurt, not exactly. I was old. I was 78. I knew I didn't have the runway I once did. It was the casualness of it, the transactional nature of my existence in their lives. I was a line item in their budget, an asset to be liquidated. I pulled into my driveway. The house stood there, solid and unassuming. A 2-story brick colonial I had bought with a VA loan 50 years ago. I had laid the walkway myself, brick by brick. I had planted the oak tree in the front yard when Mark was born. It was taller than the house now. I cut the engine. The silence rushed back in, deeper this time. I sat in the truck for a long time, just looking at the house. My home, the place where I had raised a son, loved a wife, and planned to die. Their plan was different. I finally got out. The air was cool. The smell of cut grass hung in the evening. My neighbor, Jim, waved from his porch. I waved back. A simple gesture, the most honest human interaction I'd had all day. Inside, the house was still. It smelled of lemon polish and old books. Eleanor's smell. I walked into the living room and stood before her picture on the mantel. She was smiling, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Oh, Art," she would have said, her voice full of gentle exasperation. "What are you going to do?" For the first time, I felt a tremor in my hands. I clasped them behind my back. "Steady. Be steady." I didn't turn on the television. I didn't make dinner. I walked to the kitchen and put the kettle on the stove. Not the electric one, the old metal one that whistled. I spooned dark, rich coffee grounds into my French press. The ritual was a comfort. The familiar motions. The waiting. While the water heated, I walked into my study. It was a small room, paneled in dark wood. My father's desk, a heavy roll top, dominated one wall. I sat in the creaking leather chair. I didn't turn on the lamp. The fading light from the window was enough. I unlocked the bottom right drawer. The key was small and brass, and it lived on my keychain, unnoticed. Inside were not old tax returns or warranties. Inside were ledgers, dozens of them, bound in green canvas. They dated back to 1983. The kettle began to whistle, a long, rising shriek that filled the quiet house. I let it scream. I just sat there in the dim light with my hand on the first ledger. The sound was a proclamation, a starting gun. When the whistle finally died, sputtering into silence, a decision had been made. It hadn't been an angry decision. It wasn't born of rage or a desire for revenge. It was cold. It was clear. It was like a sheet of ice forming over a deep, still lake. I went back to the kitchen. I poured the hot water over the coffee grounds. I pressed the plunger down, slowly. The aroma filled the air. Strong, black, no sugar, no cream. I took my cup back to the study. I opened the first ledger. The pages were filled with my neat, blocky handwriting. Dates, ticker symbols, purchase prices, dividends. It started with the inheritance from my father. Not much, just a few $1,000s from the sale of a small farm. He was a child of the Great Depression. He saved everything. He trusted nothing but land and cash. But he taught me the value of work and the danger of debt. I hadn't wanted to just put his money in a savings account. It felt like an insult to his hard work. A friend from my unit in Korea, a guy named Sal who went on to work on Wall Street, had given me a piece of advice once, over cheap beer in a VFW hall. "Art," he'd said, "find one or two things you believe in, something that's going to change the world, and put a little money there. Then forget about it for 30 years. In 1983, I read an article in a magazine about a man named Steve Jobs, about a computer for the home. It seemed like science fiction, but I remembered the massive, room-sized computers the Army used for logistics. The idea of one on a desk, it felt like something real, something that would change things. So I took my father's money and I bought shares in his company, Apple Computer. And then a few years later, I did the same with a software company up in Washington State, Microsoft. I never told anyone, not even Eleanor. Money was private. It wasn't for showing off. It was for security, a bulwark against the world's uncertainties. I lived on my pension from the phone company and my Social Security. I paid my bills. I kept my truck running. I wanted for nothing. Over the years, the numbers in the ledgers grew. Splits, dividends, more investments, small and careful. I treated it like a garden, tending it quietly, watching it grow. It was a private satisfaction, a secret validation of a single, risky decision made decades ago. I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter and hot. A financial burden. My son, Mark, a man who drove a new Lexus every 3 years and had a mortgage the size of small country GDP, had called me a financial burden because I lived in a paid-for house and drove a 20-year-old truck. The irony was so thick, it was almost suffocating. They didn't see me. They saw a depreciating asset, an old man taking up space, sitting on resources they felt entitled to. I closed the ledger. The decision made in the silence of the whistling kettle was now planned. It had steps. It had order. The first step would happen tomorrow. I slept soundly that night, deeper than I had in years. There was no turmoil, no wrestling with my conscience. There was only the quiet hum of a machine that had been switched on. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The ritual was the same. Coffee, the newspaper. But today, there was a purpose behind it. At precisely 9 o'clock, I picked up the phone. I didn't call Mark. I called a number I had on a business card in my desk drawer for 20 years. Harris and Associates. How may I direct your call? A crisp voice answered. I'd like to speak with Mr. Arthur Harris, I said. May I ask who is calling? Arthur Coleman. There was a pause. One moment, Mr. Coleman. Arthur Harris Sr. had drawn up my and Eleanor's original wills. He was long retired, but his son, Arthur Jr., had taken over the practice. I met him once at a town function. He had his father's steady eyes. Art Coleman? This is a surprise. Is everything all right? His voice was warm, professional. Everything is fine, Mr. Harris. I need to make an appointment. I'm looking to make some significant changes to my estate. Of course. Let me see. I heard the rustle of a calendar. I can fit you in this afternoon at 2. Does that work? 2 o'clock is perfect, I said. Thank you. See you then, Art. I hung up the phone. Step 1. Step 2 required a drive downtown. I put on a clean shirt and my good work pants. Not a suit. I wasn't a suit-and-tie man. I was a man who worked with his hands. The bank was a cold, marble building that always made me feel small. I walked past the line of tellers to the polished wooden desks in the back. I had an account here since I opened my first paper route savings book in 1955. A young woman in a sharp blazer looked up. Can I help you, sir? I need to speak with the branch manager, I said. My voice was even. Come. I sat in a padded chair that side when I sat down. The manager, a man named Peterson, came out a few minutes later. He was younger than my son, with a nervous habit of adjusting his tie. Mr. Coleman, good to see you. What can we do for you today? I got right to it. I need to make some changes to my accounts. I want to revoke the power of attorney currently assigned to my son, Mark Coleman. Peterson's smile faltered. He blinked. Revoke it? Is there a problem? No problem, I said. Just a change. I also want him removed as a signatory from my checking and savings accounts. He cleared his throat, tapping on his keyboard. Okay, we can certainly do that. It will require some paperwork, of course. And, Mr. Coleman, are you sure about this? Usually, these arrangements are for your protection, to make things easier. I'm sure, I said. The words were stones. Unmovable. I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. I always have been. He saw the look in my eyes and stopped talking. He printed the forms. I signed them. My signature was not the shaky scrawl of an old man. It was firm, deliberate, each letter a declaration. It's done, Mr. Coleman, he said, avoiding my gaze. The changes are effective immediately. Thank you for your time, I said, and walked out of the bank. The sun seemed brighter, the air cleaner. When I got home, I didn't go inside. I went to the garage, my workshop, my sanctuary. The smell of sawdust and oil filled my nostrils. It was the smell of creation, of order, of things made right by careful work. My tools hung on a pegboard wall, each in its place. Saws, hammers, wrenches, drills. A lifetime of acquiring the right tool for the right job. In the corner stood a large, red metal toolbox. It was brand new. For the last 5 years, I had been filling it. I bought the best of everything. Snap-on wrenches, a Makita drill, Starrett calipers. It was for my grandson, Ryan. March boy. I was going to give it to him when he graduated high school. A legacy, a way to pass on the things I knew. I knelt and opened the top lid. The tools were nestled in custom-cut foam. Perfect, pristine. I picked up the first wrench, a half-inch combination. The chrome was cool and smooth in my hand. I stood up, walked to the pegboard, and hung it on its hook. Then I went back. I took out the next one, and the next. Methodically, Silently, I emptied the toolbox. Each tool was a memory. The ball-peen hammer I'd used to teach Mark how to build a birdhouse. The socket set I'd used to fix Ryan's first bike. Hopes, connections, futures I had imagined. I took each one out of the red box and returned it to my wall. My tools, for my work. The toolbox, once a symbol of legacy, was now just a hollow red shell. I closed the lid. The click echoed in the quiet garage. I spent the rest of the morning in the workshop, not building anything, just cleaning, wiping down each tool, oiling the wooden handles, sharpening the blades of my hand planes. The repetitive motions were a meditation, a prayer of self-reliance. My phone, which I'd left in the house, began to ring around noon. I heard it faintly through the garage wall. I didn't move. It rang for a while, then stopped. A minute later, it buzzed. A text message, then another. I kept working. At 1:30, I washed my hands with gritty orange soap, scrubbing the oil and grime from under my nails. I put on the same clean shirt and drove to the lawyer's office. Mr. Harris's office smelled of leather and old paper, a smell of quiet authority. He greeted me with a firm handshake and led me into a conference room with a long, polished table. "Art," he said, sitting across from me, "you said you wanted to make significant changes. How significant are we talking?" I didn't answer right away. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out the top ledger. I slid it across the table. He looked at it, confused. He opened it. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. He looked up at me, his professional calm completely gone. "Art, what is this?" "That's 1983 to 1995, I said. I pulled out another ledger. "This one's 96 to 2010. I laid it next to the first one. "The rest are in my truck." He spent the next hour looking through the ledgers. He would stop, pull out a calculator, punch in some numbers, and then just stare at the result. He looked at me as if he'd never seen me before. "Art," he finally said, his voice hushed. "Do you have any idea what this is worth?" "The current market value." "I have a rough idea," I said. "I follow the stock market. On the television." He shook his head, laughing a little, a sound of pure disbelief. "A rough idea. Art, this is not a retirement account. This is a dynasty. It's a secret," I corrected him. "It's always been a secret. Now I want to do something with it." "Change your will," you said. "Leave it all to Mark and Ryan." "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it filled the room. "My current will leaves the house to Mark and a trust for Ryan. The residue of the estate, which he always assumed was just my savings account, was to be split between them. I want to change that. I want to change all of it." He leaned forward. "What do you want to do?" "I want to be removed from their lives as a financial equation," I said. "I was informed yesterday that I am a financial burden. I would like to unburden them." Mr. Harris just looked at me. His lawyer's mind was working, putting the pieces together. He saw the quiet dignity in my posture, the finality in my tone. He didn't ask what happened. He just nodded. "Okay, Art, let's get to work. Let's unburden them." The phone call started in earnest that evening. First, it was Mark. I let it go to voicemail. "Dad, it's Mark. The bank called. Said you revoked my power of attorney. What's going on? Is this some kind of mistake? Call me back. This is a huge hassle to sort out." I listened to the message, my finger hovering over the screen. A hassle. My autonomy was a hassle for him. I deleted it. Not replied. Deleted. An hour later, another call. "Susan." I let it go to voicemail. "Art, this is Susan. Mark is spinning out. We're really worried about you. Did something happen? Are you okay? Please, just call us and let us know you're all right. We're supposed to be a family." Worried. The performative concern was worse than the annoyance. It was a lie, and we both knew it. I deleted the message. The texts were a stream of consciousness of their escalating panic. "Dad, call me. Seriously, what is going on? Are you mad about the grill? I told you Todd was an idiot. Susan is worried sick. Pick up the phone. Is this about money? Do you need money? We can help." That last one almost made me laugh. They thought I was having a financial crisis. They, who had labeled me a burden, were now offering to help. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I didn't block their numbers. That felt too aggressive, too loud. I simply chose not to answer. My silence was the consequence. It was the empty space where their assumptions used to be. For years, they had treated my presence as a given, my support as their right. Now, they were faced with my absence, and they didn't know what to do. They were like actors on a stage who suddenly realized a key character had simply walked off, leaving them with pointless lines. Their confusion was the purest validation of my decision. They didn't ask if they had hurt me. They didn't ask if they had done something wrong. They asked what was wrong with me. They saw my actions as a symptom of senility or a dramatic ploy for attention. They couldn't conceive that it was a rational response to their own behavior. They had never seen me as a whole person with a rich internal life and a breaking point. And now that the invisible man was finally acting, they assumed he must be mad. I spent the next few days in a state of strange, productive calm. I went through the house, room by room. This wasn't about cleaning. It was about accounting. I stood in Mark's old bedroom. It was painted a neutral beige now, a guest room that was never used. But in the closet, on the top shelf, was a box. His old baseball trophies, his high school diploma, a collection of comic books, things he had left behind, assuming I would be their eternal curator. I took the box down. I didn't open it. I sealed it with packing tape and wrote Mark on the side in black marker. I went through the photo albums, pictures of birthday parties, Christmases, vacations to the lake. I saw myself in the background of most of them, a little out of focus, holding a camera or manning a barbecue. The official recorder of memories, but rarely the subject. There was one photo I paused on. Mark, about 10 years old, sitting on my shoulders. We were at a baseball game. He was wearing a ridiculously oversized foam finger and grinning from ear to ear. I remembered the warmth of the sun, the smell of hot dogs, the weight of him on my shoulders. A good weight, a happy weight. A pang of something sharp and painful went through my chest. A ghost of a feeling from a life that was no longer mine. I closed the album. I didn't destroy the photos. That would be an act of anger. This wasn't anger. This was surgery, a careful excision. I packed them all into a box, labeled it. Day after day, I worked. I sorted through Eleanor's things with a gentle reverence. Her clothes, which still smelled faintly of her perfume. Her collection of porcelain birds. Her gardening books with her notes in the margins. I packed them carefully in separate boxes marked Eleanor. These were sacred. They would go with me. The house slowly transformed from a home into a collection of containers. A life sorted and categorized. One afternoon, there was a knock on the door. Not the frantic banging I expected from Mark. A lighter, more hesitant sound. I looked through the peephole. It was Chloe, my granddaughter, Ryan's older sister. She was a student at the local university, a quiet, thoughtful girl with my wife's eyes. She was holding 2 paper cups of coffee. I hesitated. She was their daughter, but she was different. I opened the door. She gave me a small, sad smile. "Hey, Grandpa, can I come in?" I stepped back and let her pass. She walked into the living room and saw the boxes. Her face fell. "Are you moving?" she asked, her voice small. "Something like that," I said. She handed me a coffee. Black, 2 sugars, the way you like it. I had forgotten she knew that. It had been black, no sugar for the last few days, but the fact that she remembered it all was a balm. We sat in silence for a moment, on the couch, surrounded by the neatly stacked evidence of my departure. "They're going crazy, you know," she said finally, looking at her cup. "Mom and Dad, they think you've lost it." I just nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. It was good. "They don't get it," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "They don't listen. They never have. They just talk about you, like you're a problem to be solved." My eyes met hers, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt seen, truly seen. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," she whispered. A tear rolled down her cheek. "I'm so sorry for whatever they did, for whatever they said. You're a good man. You're my grandpa." It was the apology I would never get from her parents. It was simple. It was sincere. And it meant everything. It was the confirmation that I wasn't the crazy one, that my pain was real and justified. "Thank you, Chloe," I said. My voice was thick. "That means more than you know." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to live my life," I said, "on my own terms." She nodded, as if that was the most sensible thing in the world. She didn't ask for details. She didn't pry. She just sat with me, drinking her coffee in the quiet, boxed-up room. It was an act of solidarity, a silent alliance. When she left, she hugged me tightly. "Call me if you need anything," she said. "Anything at all. My number hasn't changed." After she was gone, I felt a new kind of resolve. Chloe's visit had washed away the last vestiges of doubt. I wasn't just doing this for myself anymore. I was doing it for the version of me that she saw. The good man. The grandpa. A few days later, I drove to the VFW post. It was a low brick building on the edge of town, a place that hadn't changed in 50 years. Inside, it was dark and smelled of stale beer and camaraderie. Walt was at the bar, nursing a Coke. He was my age, a Marine who'd been in Da Nang when I was in Seoul. We didn't talk about the wars. We didn't have to. "Art," he grunted, nodding towards the stool next to him. "You look steady." "Feel steady, Walt," I said, sitting down. The bartender, a young veteran from more recent war, brought me a coffee without asking. "Heard you're selling the house," Walt said, staring straight ahead at the rows of bottles. News traveled fast in a small town. "That's the plan. Mark and his wife finally push you out?" he asked. It wasn't a question of judgment, just fact-finding. "They pushed," I said, "just not in the direction they intended." Walt let out a short, dry chuckle. He understood. He'd had his own battles with his kids. "Good for you. A man's got a right to his own damn castle, even if he decides to sell the thing and live in a tent." We sat there for an hour. We talked about baseball, about the lousy county road repairs, about a friend who was in the hospital. We didn't talk about my son again. We didn't need to. The validation was implicit. "You're here. You're one of us. You're sane." Driving home from the VFW, I felt fortified. My world had shrunk, but it had also become more solid. The foundations were no longer my family, but a quiet granddaughter, an old Marine, and a belief in my own worth. It was enough. It was more than enough. The next phase of the plan was the most complex. Mr. Harris and I met several times. We hired an accounting firm to do a full valuation of the portfolio. The number they came back with was staggering. Even Mr. Harris, who had been prepared, had to sit down. "Art, this is north of $80 million, he said, his voice a whisper. I just nodded. It was an abstract number to me. The ledgers, the physical act of tracking it, that was real. The string of zeros on a spreadsheet felt like someone else's life. "So," he said, recovering his composure, "the plan. You want to create a foundation. What kind of foundation?" "My father was a carpenter," I said. "He could build anything. He taught me how to work with my hands, how to respect a tool, how to build something that lasts. That's a dying art." I told him my vision, a nonprofit trade school, for kids who weren't destined for college, for people who wanted to learn welding, carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, skills, real, tangible skills that could build a life, a place that taught the dignity of labor. Mr. Harris's eyes lit up. "The Coleman School for the Trades," he said, a smile spreading across his face. "I love it." We spent weeks on the legal architecture, establishing the foundation, setting up a board of directors, Mr. Harris, Walt, and a retired shop teacher I respected. I was to be an anonymous benefactor. My name wouldn't be on it, but my father's would. The John Coleman Institute. We drafted the new will. It was a simple document. Upon my death, all remaining assets, including the proceeds from the sale of my house, were to be transferred to the Institute. The executor was to be Mr. Harris. Mark was not mentioned. Ryan was not mentioned. I put the house on the market. The realtor, a sharp woman named Carol, was stunned by how prepared it was. The boxes were neatly stacked in the garage. The walls were clean. It was a shell waiting for a new family. It sold in 4 days, for cash, to a young family with 2 small children. The closing date was set for 2 weeks out. The final piece was the confrontation. I knew it was coming. They had been leaving increasingly desperate messages. They had even driven by the house, but I hadn't answered the door. It happened on a Tuesday. I was packing the last of Eleanor's things into a box when a car screeched to a halt in my driveway. It was Mark. He stormed up the walkway I had laid, his face a mask of fury. He didn't knock. He pounded on the door with his fist. "Dad, I know you're in there. Open this door right now. We saw the sold sign. What the hell is going on?" I took a deep breath. I closed the box. I walked to the door and opened it. He stood there, panting, his expensive suit looking rumpled. Susan was behind him, hovering by the car, looking horrified. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Selling our house. Mom's house." "It's my house, Mark," I said. My voice was calm. "Low. I bought it. I paid for it. I'm selling it. Without telling us? Without consulting us? I have power of—" He stopped, remembering. "You cut me off. From everything. The bank, the house. Are you insane? Are you senile?" "No," I said. "I'm not. I am solvent. And I'm clear-headed." "Then what is this? Some kind of sick punishment? Because we wanted you to move into a safer place? A place where you could be looked after?" There it was. The lie they told themselves. That this was for my own good. I looked at him. My son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders. Now a stranger shouting on my doorstep. "I was on your patio, Mark," I said, my voice never rising. "At the barbecue." I was standing by the grill. The kitchen window was open. The color drained from his face. He knew. Instantly. He looked back at Susan, whose own face had gone pale with dawning, sickening realization. He turned back to me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. "I heard you," I continued, the words precise and clean, like a surgeon's cut. "I heard Susan. I heard you call me a burden. I heard her wonder how much longer I had left. And then, I heard you laugh." The silence that followed was absolute. The neighborhood sounds, a lawnmower, a distant dog, seemed to fade away. There was only the space between us, filled with the ugly truth. He finally found his voice. It was a choked whisper. "Dad, I didn't mean it like that. It was just frustration. We were worried." "No," I said, cutting him off, but my tone was still quiet. There was no need to shout. The truth was loud enough. "You meant it exactly like that. You just didn't mean for me to hear it. There's a difference." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the panic in his eyes. But it wasn't the panic of a son who had hurt his father. It was the panic of a man who saw his inheritance, his future, his plans, evaporating before his eyes. "The things you were worried about," I said, "the house, the upkeep, the financial burden, you don't have to worry about them anymore. I've taken care of it. You're free." He just stared at me, speechless. "Goodbye, Mark," I said. And I closed the door. I didn't slam it. I just closed it. The click of the latch was the final word. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. My hands were trembling now. The surgery was over. The patient would live. The news of the donation wasn't a spectacle I created. I had wanted it to be anonymous. But this was a small town, and $80 million was not a small amount of money. Mr. Harris had arranged a press conference to announce the formation of the John Coleman Institute. He had to. The scale of it demanded a public announcement, to solicit property for the campus, to begin hiring staff. A local news crew was there, the editor of the town paper. I didn't plan to go. I was busy moving into my new apartment, a small, 2-bedroom place on the other side of town, clean, bright, and manageable. The second bedroom was already being converted into a smaller, more efficient workshop. Chloe called me. "Grandpa, they're dedicating the institute today, at the community center. Mr. Harris is going to make the announcement. You should be there. It's not about me, Chloe. It's about my father." "Please," she said. "For me?" So I went. I stood in the back of the room, wearing my clean work pants and a plaid shirt. No one recognized me. I was just another old man. Mr. Harris stood at the podium, looking proud. He spoke about the decline of the trades. He spoke about the importance of skilled labor. He spoke about a local family's deep belief in the dignity of work. Then he announced the endowment. A collective gasp went through the room when he said the number. $87 million. The portfolio had had a good week. This transformative gift, he announced, was made possible by a single, lifelong resident of this town. A man who believes in this community. A man who learned the value of a hard day's work from his father, John Coleman. People started clapping. Mr. Harris looked out into the crowd, his eyes scanning the back. He found me. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The local news anchor, a young woman with a microphone, cornered him afterwards. Mr. Harris, an incredible anonymous donation. But the town is buzzing. Can you give us any more information about the benefactor? I saw Mr. Harris hesitate. He was a good lawyer, a man of his word. He wouldn't betray my confidence. But then Walt, who was standing beside him, leaned into the microphone. Walt had no such contractual obligations. Vouching. Walt grunted, a twinkle in his eye. Hell, it ain't anonymous. It was Art Coleman. And he did it because he's a better man than the rest of us. The camera swung around, searching. The anchor looked bewildered. Art Coleman? The man who used to work at the phone company. Every head in the room turned. My cover was blown. I just stood there. There was nothing to do but stand there. The news report aired that night. I watched it on a small television in my new, sparsely furnished living room. There was a picture of me, a grainy photo from the phone company's newsletter 20 years ago. There was footage of my old house with the sold sign in the yard. And there was the interview with Mark. They had found him. He was standing on the pristine lawn of his own oversized house, looking haggard. Yes, we knew about my father's investments. He stammered a terrible, clumsy lie. We are incredibly proud of his philanthropic spirit. This has always been his plan, to give back to the community he loves. Susan was nodding beside him, her face a plastic mask of supportive grief. The anchor's voiceover was brutal in its simplicity. While the son claims to have known, sources close to the situation say the family was completely blindsided, having recently expressed concerns to friends that the elder Mr. Coleman was becoming a financial burden. They cut back to Mark's face, just for a second. The mask had slipped. It was the face of a man who had been publicly, irrevocably exposed. I turned off the television. I felt no triumph, no glee, just a profound, quiet stillness. It was done. The truth was out. Not my version or his version, just the truth. My new life was simple. I woke up. I made coffee. I spent hours in my new workshop building a beautiful cherrywood bookshelf for my living room. I read books. I listened to baseball games on the radio. I had lunch with Walt once a week at the VFW. Chloe came over for dinner every Sunday. We talked for hours. She told me about her classes, her friends, her dreams. I told her stories about her grandmother. I was not waiting anymore. Not waiting for a phone call. Not waiting for a visit. Not waiting to die. I was living. Each day was my own. Each minute was accounted for. About a month after the news report, a letter arrived. It was addressed in Mark's handwriting. I recognized the expensive, heavy cardstock of his personal stationery. I held it in my hand. I could feel the weight of it, the weight of his regret, or his anger, or his desperation. I put it, unopened, on the new bookshelf. Maybe one day I would read it. Maybe I wouldn't. The door to that part of my life was not locked, but it was closed, and I was the only one with the key. For now, I was content to leave it that way. This morning, I brew my coffee. The sun streamed through the clean windows of my small apartment. The air smelled of sawdust and fresh paint. I sat in a comfortable chair I'd bought for myself. I didn't have a legacy of blood and inheritance to pass down anymore. My son and his family were ghosts from former life. But the John Coleman Institute was breaking ground across town. I'd driven by yesterday. Young people in hard hats were clearing the land. The sound of machinery was the sound of progress. The sound of a new legacy being built. One of skill and dignity and purpose. It was a better inheritance. It was clean. It was steady. It was whole. And in the quiet of my new life, for the first time in a long, long time, so was I.